Hello, my beautiful friends, my fellow space blobs, sparkly blobs, earth blobs, or whatever form you're coming into this space as. I am here for it. My name is Sarah, and I am really devoted to creating spaces around tarot and astrology that feel like we're listening to these deeper archetypes, these deeper stories, the deeper hum of truth that is longing to be expressed. And I'm hoping we'll get to do that again here today with the Gemini new moon and set ourselves up for some of this beauty. Now, admittedly, sitting down here today to work, I'm just feeling a bit emotional and not in maybe my bubbliest form at the moment. I think the world is feeling really heavy. And I know many of you also feel that. And you might be feeling that in your own individual struggles and questions and how to be here in this world, as well as maybe feeling some of the heaviness of world events. It's definitely been kind of eating away at me, and it's interesting to sit down for such a beautiful new moon full of vision and grace and care with some of that energy moving through right now, the difficult, deeper energetics. But one thing I would say about Gemini is that it makes space for us to hold all of it. And it breaks this rule and this idea that we have to be one thing or another, that the world can only be this way or this way, that it cannot be so many things all at once. And I just want to offer up here right at the beginning of our chat about the Gemini new moon, which is going to be conjunct Venus. It's going to have all of this beautiful supportive energy, is that we can be feeling multiple things at one time and we can contain so many things. So while we may be hurting over some injustices in the world or elements of our lives, we can also simultaneously be feeling some really beautiful things. And that does challenge some of the ways I think many of us have grown up, challenge some of the ways culture has taught us that we have to look or feel, taught us some of the ways we have to perform our caring and our sense of justice and our sense of being in the world. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts of this Gemini new moon. So grab your tea, grab your journal, grab whatever you like to do while I am speaking and you would like to relax. I love the idea of people working on their little creative projects or just relaxing at the end of the day while we explore together. Let's talk through this beautiful Gemini new moon. Probably the most obvious aspect of this Gemini new moon is going to be the stellium hanging out there in Gemini during this little moment in time, because we'll have the sun and the moon and Venus conjunct for this new moon, but we also have Jupiter and Mercury hanging out in Gemini as well. That is a lot of the energy right now in one sign, in the mutable air sign. So we are really, really working with this archetype, with this energetic, and with the way it helps us think about our world, about ourselves, and the way we use our imaginations. I would say Gemini at its core is about imagination and storytelling and how we use our thinking minds in inventive ways. Now, this also means that we're going to have to break out of some of the binaries that we often feel like we have to think in. While Gemini is associated with the twins and the idea of a binary, what Gemini is actually doing is by saying that we can be both and, we're breaking out of dualistic thinking, that we're breaking out of the limitations that it has to be either or, that there's a correct path and a wrong path, that you can only contain one emotion, not many. You know, our cultures tend to teach that we can only be one thing. We'll have one role in society. We'll have one emotional response to a life change, that if we're upset about something horrendous happening in the world, we can't also have an inner dreamer that's longing for something beautiful. But one thing that I really love about this new moon and this stellium energy in Gemini is that it invites us to make space for all of it. And that we aren't bad people for wanting to dream or care for ourselves or build something beautiful, while also simultaneously maybe grieving or releasing something. And that can be playing out on so many different levels. So one of the first things I want to just say here is, during this Gemini new moon, make space for the many aspects of yourself. You know, maybe even write down all the different aspects of yourself and the different ways they are wanting to approach life or the things that they think are most important. Just notice how often we will say, well, because there's a part of me that feels like there's a lot of injustice in the world, for instance, I feel very selfish wanting to live in a supportive home, for example, because I don't deserve that, because there's all of this going on over here. Why? Why can't there be space for both of those things to be happening at the same time? I think this is also a really great new moon for thinking about rules. Gemini is a rule breaker. Gemini is going to challenge what we just assume is status quo, assume is the way things need to be done. Now, of course, with rule breaking, what's really interesting is this whole idea of you need to know what the rules are in order to know which are the important ones to break. We need to have enough of a sense of ourself and the container we live in order to understand why it's important to break out of certain rules. But this is a great time to think about the pressures you put on yourself, the performances you think you need to do, and also how productive or happy-go-lucky or joyful or on top of it you need to be in order to live a meaningful life. It's a great time to just reflect on all the rules that you might be putting on yourself and all the expectations you might feel. I think this stellium in Gemini is also really interesting for helping us calibrate to the new energetics that are moving through on the collective larger level as well as our individual levels. Many of us are changing shape. Our lives are starting to move in a slightly different way. We might be noticing systems are moving in a slightly different way. This is a very great place in the year to just allow yourself to kind of calibrate, get used to, and feel through those energetic waves as they land. So it's very supportive for that if you're feeling that. And I just want to say, in conjunction with that, with recalibration and kind of getting used to new energetic waves, you might feel a little bit tired around this new moon. You might feel like you're both very energized and buzzed and electric, and like you crash a little bit. So just kind of keeping an eye on that, allowing yourself some spaces to integrate is really helpful. Let's talk about, though, probably my favorite aspect of this new moon, and that is that it is conjunct Venus. It just makes me happy. Venus has a 1.5-year cycle, essentially. And so right now, Venus is meeting up with the sun at the same time as we're having this new moon. And that means that we are not seeing Venus in the sky at all at the moment. By July, we will start seeing Venus as the evening star. And the sun and Venus meet a couple of times during any Venus cycle. The last time they met up was in August of 2023 during Venus retrograde. And we were going through the beginning of a new Venus cycle. Venus's new cycle begins during that retrograde when the sun and Venus meet. So now again, we're meeting up with Venus. And this is a really deep transformational meeting when the sun and Venus are together. It's kind of this liquefying, dissolving, burning away the old process that happens. So a couple things that are fun to work with here during this Gemini new moon. One, you can kind of think back to last August, maybe some of the worries, the dreams, the hopes that you were working with. If you were on my journey of the alchemy of Venus retrograde last summer, on my Patreon, you might want to look back over some of the notes you were having during that process and what we were working through then, because during this meetup, a lot of us are going to be noticing that the questions we had then are starting to come into deeper understanding now. This is also a really beautiful doorway energy. We're releasing and liquefying old ways, and Venus is here to support us in that and to use our dreaming and our thinking to create something beautiful. I think sometimes when we're talking about rule breaking and all of that good stuff, thinking about how we have to perform or the rules we put on ourselves for our productivity or our place in the world, it's easy to just focus on like the hard part of that. But one thing that Venus always brings in is this permission to also just have a little bit of fun, have a little bit of play. Allow yourself to play with your visions and your dreams and your words and your incantations of your words in ways that feel really beautiful. Are you allowed to have delicious storytelling about your life, about this world? I think so many of us, when we're feeling the sadness of the world, and it's just a difficult, interesting world to live in. You know, it always has been. this whole time, every century, it's been difficult and strange and full of multi-leveled experiences of just every possible range of emotion. And it's interesting to notice what we allow ourselves into our dream vision. And it makes me think of the book Rest is Resistance, which I probably mention every other video because I think it's one of the most important books I've read over the last year or any time in my life. She's very dedicated. Trisha Hersey is very dedicated to speaking about how important it is to use our dreaming to allow ourselves to dream of a more beautiful world. And she even says here, imagine a world without oppression. Take more time here. Visualize softness. Breathe deep. Envision a world centered in justice. Stay here. I love that incantation. And I think so often, we will maybe put our toe into a beautiful dream of a world where everyone's taken care of and there's a softness and a kindness and a reciprocity and equity. And then we'll be like, well, that's a fever dream. I can't have that. But allowing ourselves to stay for a little longer, allowing ourselves to stay in the richness of a beautiful dream. And that can be an individual dream that you have. It can also be a bigger dream about the systems that we're living in. Whatever is coming up for you, this Venus conjunction, this Venus transformation moment is so beautiful for supporting that kind of powerful dreaming. We have one final conversation for this Gemini new moon, and that is a squaring off with Saturn in Pisces, our good friend Saturn in Pisces. I'm loving the Saturn in Pisces transit. I think it's so powerful. And having this square off between Sun, Moon, and Venus in Gemini and Saturn in Pisces, two mutable signs, it's a really interesting spot. This is another kind of liquefying, dissolving conversation. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about this being a calibrating new moon. We're getting used to how we're changing. We're getting used to how the world's changing. We're getting used to new energetics. We're incorporating those. Those new energetics are influencing the way we're dreaming and noticing what's coming up there. And this square is a deep look at what we can't take with us in the coming new energetic cycles. We're still getting used to Jupiter in Gemini. We're still getting used to Pluto in Aquarius. We've got a lot of new energetics that have come into the picture this year so far. And this square for me is a real moment of reckoning about what we just cannot carry anymore. That could be practical projects. It can also be identities. It can also be expectations. It can also be a certain vision of the world that you think you need to hold. And it's also a really great place to think about what you're tolerating. What you're saying, I have to live with this. I have to just let this be. And is that true? Is it true that it always has to be this way? Is it true that it always has to look this way? This is a really wonderful moon. I would say this new moon is a lot of questioning. Is it true? And then it's also about bringing this all full circle, really thinking about the seeds you truly want to plant and letting yourself stay in those dreams long enough to actually feel them just a little bit. So I think that this is going to be one of those really soulful, medicinal new moons that are very, very gentle, very loving, very tender that we need. And we really, really need it now. It also has a lot of high energy to it as well. So it's got an interesting combination of flavors. How are you all feeling moving into this Gemini new moon? I would be so curious to hear. Let's pull a couple of cards for this new moon and just feel through it together. I always love to use tarot to soften into my listening and to just gently open my mind and my heart to what's longing to be heard right now. And so I love this moment with us. Justice. Pretty great card. Makes a lot of sense to me and the themes we were just exploring, and also just kind of themes coming up, I think, on the collective level right now. Really interesting themes around what is justice and what does it look like? What does it feel like? Oh, another card popped out and it's the King of Pentacles. okay, this is so interesting. Let's stick with these two because it's very interesting. Neither of these is very Gemini necessarily, though Justice is associated with fellow air sign Libra. But neither of these has that kind of playful, flirtatious energetic of Gemini. But I think that's what's interesting. For me, Gemini is a carrier of deep energy, and it allows energy to move in a way that allows us to translate and understand new things. And that's part of its gift, is that because it's mutable energy that's flexible and moves, it can also help us to see new things, see new ingredients, and it can help land some new ideas. So Justice is really interesting. I think in the context too of thinking about that square off with Saturn in Pisces, this idea of really taking a good look at what isn't coming with us into the next phase and what is, because Justice is about really looking at our process so far, looking at the journey, understanding how our past decisions have brought us to where we are now, and also how our past experiences have brought us the certain wisdom we need and the ingredients we need, honoring that, respecting that. And as we look back, as we understand that process, understanding what decisiveness we need moving forward, how to carry that energy forward, and how to allow ourselves to decide to keep putting one foot in front of the other. There's a very determined energy to Justice, which is that I'm going to keep being here. I'm going to keep showing up. I'm going to keep creating. When I look back at all I have moved through in this lifetime, I will continue. And there's also this clarity of knowing that that wisdom can serve us very well moving forward. So when this card shows up, this is a great time to think about all that you have built over the last couple of years. Think about what this last 9 months during this Venus cycle we're in now, what that's brought for you and how that's informed how you're moving forward. Now, the King of Pentacles has a completely different energy here, but I think they work very well together, because the King of Pentacles associated with Taurus, with that energy we just moved through with Jupiter in Taurus over the last year, was all about tending to our garden. King of Pentacles is an energetic of a garden growing over time, and wisdom growing over time, and projects growing over time, and how tending to that over time shows us something powerful. So on the one hand, this can be a message of just realizing how much you have tended to and grown and moved through, and recognizing it, and appreciating that, appreciating your own journey, appreciating the journey of the lifetime. And it's also a reminder here that we are planting seeds during a new moon, right? We are planting beautiful new seeds. This Gemini new moon is so much about vision. It's a reminder. Both of these cards are actually a reminder. Anything that we may be dreaming of right now, we will need to keep showing up consistently to that dream. We'll need to stay there long enough. Like I was reading from Resta's Resistance when she said, imagine a world full of peace and compassion. Stay there. So this is a reminder that we need to stay the course for those beautiful seeds we're planting, those beautiful dreams we may be envisioning for our world, for our own small drop in the ocean lives, as well as the ocean itself. How can we stay there? How can we sustain it? Thinking about practices that we want to bring in that help us to do that, help us to sustain. Because while Gemini will give us that wind underneath our wings and get the energy swirling around and moving, we're going to need to think about how we want to plant those seeds when we move out of Gemini season, when we move forward into the next seasons. How do we want to keep those dreams and visions alive? And in fact, I'm so excited because this summer I'm going to be doing an entire summer of practices that are all about waking the wild dreamer and allowing ourselves to stay in it over on my Patreon. So if you would like to just have some really fun practices every single Friday for all of the summer, we are going to be doing that over there. It's going to be available to both of my paid tiers. So if you're interested in just having some support along the journey, it's super affordable. And I just wanted to create something that I'm needing for myself because it has felt so heavy, and it's going to continue to feel heavy, and it's going to continue to be an intense world we're living in. And I was just thinking about I want support for that. I want practices for that. I want to feel like every week I'm doing a little something for my spirit, for my well-being, for taking care of my wild dreamer so that I can keep being here, so that I can keep trying my best to do something meaningful for this world and showing up and giving and paying it forward. And so I was thinking, okay, what do I need in order to keep that inner lantern going right now? What do I need to feel supported? And that is where the idea for the Summer of the Wild Dreamer came from. And it's just going to be light. It's not going to be a heavy homework investment. We're going to be doing practices that feel approachable, that feel like we can do them and feel nourished by them. And it's going to be every Friday. I'm going to be putting out a new little mini practice that builds over the course of June, July, and August. So if you want to join me for that, I would love to see you in that space. We're going to have such a beautiful time. And that's going to start right after this Gemini new moon comes through. So it's going to be really beautiful timing. We're also going to be having an activation for this Gemini new moon over in that space. So if you're looking for a little bit of support, I would love to be that support for you. Everything I create is really the kind of support I always want, and it's something that really comes from my heart. So I'd love to see you there. I hope you all have a beautiful Gemini new moon. I will see you back here very soon for our next chat. I'm sending you all so much love. Have a beautiful beginning to June, and I will see you here very, very soon.